How did a group of obscure metals buried deep underground become central to global power, national security, and the future of artificial intelligence when one country now controls 60% of supply and processes 90% of what the world uses? This video unpacks why ministers from more than 50 countries are gathering in Washington, what is really at stake behind closed doors, and why decisions made this week could quietly reshape the global balance of power without a single shot being fired. If this effort succeeds, supply chains that underpin defense systems, electric vehicles, and advanced computing could be rerouted away from a single dominant supplier. If it fails, existing dependencies harden, giving leverage to whoever controls access. If tensions escalate, minerals once treated as commodities become strategic choke points. The outcome affects inflation, military readiness, climate transitions, and how states compete in an era where economic security increasingly defines geopolitical strength. The meeting taking place in Washington marks the first Critical Minerals Ministerial, a US-led initiative designed to build alliances that reduce reliance on China's mineral dominance. Hosted by the US State Department, it brings together delegations from more than 50 countries, including all G7 members, the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and India. The gathering reflects a growing recognition that critical minerals are no longer just inputs for industry, but pillars of national power. The roots of this imbalance stretch back decades. China began investing heavily in rare earth mining and processing in the 1990s, accepting environmental costs that other countries avoided. Over time, it built integrated supply chains, developed proprietary processing technologies, and filed thousands of patents. According to US Geological Survey data, global rare earth reserves stood at roughly 110 million tons in 2024, with China holding the largest share and deposits of 12 out of 17 rare earth elements. Rare earths are a subset of critical minerals, which also include lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, aluminium, and zinc. These materials are essential for batteries, semiconductors, permanent magnets, military hardware, renewable energy systems, and AI-related infrastructure. The United States fully relies on imports for 12 critical minerals and depends on imports for at least half of its needs for another 29, making supply disruption a systemic risk rather than a marginal concern. China's dominance is not limited to mining. It processes about 90% of global rare earth supply, giving it control over the most technically complex and environmentally hazardous stage of production. Processing requires extensive chemical use and generates toxic waste, a cost many Western countries have been unwilling or unable to absorb. As a result, even when minerals are mined elsewhere, they often still flow through Chinese refineries. Tensions sharpened in 2024 when China began restricting exports of rare earth metals. By April, 7 were placed under export controls, followed by 5 more in October. These moves coincided with broader trade disputes and highlighted how minerals could be weaponized economically. A temporary truce emerged later in the year when restrictions on the final 5 metals were paused for 1 year after negotiations at an Asia-Pacific summit, in exchange for the US stepping back from proposed 100% tariffs. Against this backdrop, the Washington Ministerial serves multiple purposes. It signals political intent, coordinates allied responses, and tests how far countries are willing to align with US preferences. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has framed the talks around economic and national security, holding bilateral meetings with South Korea and India focused on investment commitments and supply chain diversification. These discussions reflect a push to bind mineral access to broader strategic partnerships. One of the most contentious issues on the agenda is whether to set a minimum price for critical minerals. Supporters argue a price floor would reduce investor risk, stabilize supply, and prevent dominant players from undercutting competitors through artificially low prices. Australia, which holds the world's fourth largest rare earth reserves, has been particularly vocal, having invested heavily in building its own processing capacity as an alternative to China. However, the United States is reported to be stepping back from guaranteeing such price floors. Market reactions were immediate, with Australian mining stocks falling after reports emerged. This hesitation reveals a tension between market-based approaches favored by Washington and industrial policy strategies pursued by allies seeking certainty for capital-intensive projects with long development timelines. Alongside diplomacy, the US is also moving unilaterally. President Donald Trump announced the creation of a strategic mineral stockpile known as Project Vault. The initiative combines $2 billion in private capital with a $10 billion loan from the US Export-Import Bank. The goal is to buffer against supply shocks and signal long-term demand to producers, mirroring strategies long used for oil and gas. Other countries are taking similar steps. Japan reinforced its rare earth stockpiling system in 2020. South Korea maintains reserves through a state-run corporation. The European Union adopted the Resource EU Action Plan in December, including plans for a critical raw materials center to coordinate diversification and stockpiling. Australia announced details of a $1.2 billion strategic reserve earlier this year. Consider a scenario where these efforts converge. Allied countries align investment, accept higher processing costs, and gradually build parallel supply chains. Over time, China's leverage diminishes, price volatility decreases, and critical minerals become less politically charged. This would not eliminate competition, but it would rebalance power in favor of distributed resilience rather than concentration. Now consider an alternative path. Coordination falters, price guarantees remain elusive, and projects outside China struggle to attract capital. Export controls tighten further, supply disruptions ripple through defense and technology sectors, and minerals become bargaining chips in broader geopolitical disputes. In that scenario, economic coercion becomes a routine instrument of statecraft. The Washington meeting is unlikely to deliver immediate breakthroughs. The US still lacks significant processing capacity and remains far from matching China's integrated ecosystem. Analysts suggest the ministerial is more about visibility and alignment than rapid reshoring. Yet, symbolism matters. It reflects how economic security has moved to the center of foreign policy, reshaping alliances around materials rather than ideology,